Not yet.
Oh, Tony's going to connect via phone.
Just saw that.
Please out the radiators, okay? Okay, sure.
Do we have either Representative Scanlon or Senator Fonfara on?
Yes, we do. They're both there, as are the ranking members of Finance, Senator Martin and Representative Cheeseman.
I saw both of them.
Hi
So-
guys, sorry. I
All set, Tony?
Well, I'm on my phone because my computer is blank.
Uh,
So I'll be able to be on just by through my phone. So go
Okay.
ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the a fiscal accountability report that we're going to be going over. Representative Baker, if you could mute your phone, that would be great. If you are not,
I think it's Meskers.
yeah. Steve, could you mute your phone too, please?
Apologies. Yep.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. We're going to be going over the fiscal accountability report, both from the Office of Policy and Management and the Office of Fiscal Analysis. This is another nice day. First, Representative Walker, do you have anything to say? She's having computer trouble, so we're going to let her come on when she can. There you go, Tony. No, Tony, one more time.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. I finally got my computer, so I'm going to sign in to the meeting, but I just want to say good morning to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, great. Senator Minor?
Good morning, and it is nice to hear that it seems as though you're getting a little better.
I am. I'm getting, I still have a cold, but it is what it is. Representative France?
Morning, welcome everybody. Looking forward to hearing the reports. Thank you.
Senator Fonfara?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Representative Scanlon?
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody. I'll just take 30 seconds to say thank you. This is probably the last chair meeting that I will chair as the committee chairman, and it's just been a great honor to work not just with our folks on finance, but also our friends on approach 2, and then certainly the nonpartisan staff that's going to give this report today in OPM. Obviously, goes without saying that the news we're about to hear, I think, is overwhelmingly positive. And for those of us who have been at this for a while, it's great to see a report like this. We are not out of the woods. There's a lot of challenges that remain, but the news that we're seeing in the FAR report today, I think, is a continuation of the good news that we've been getting of late. And I think that's certainly something we should be celebrating. So thank you, Senator Austin, and thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to work with you these last few years.
Thank you. Senator Martin?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I am good to go. And also, in review of the report, yeah, it's very encouraging to see some positive numbers. So thank you so much. I'm good.
Thank you. Representative Cheeseman?
Thank you very much. And again, looking forward to receiving the report. And I wanted to take this opportunity not only to say goodbye to Representative Scanlon, but there are a number of other people on this meeting who will be moving on to different endeavors. And I just want to say how much I've enjoyed working with you all and wish you the best of luck in the future. Thank you very much.
All right, so,
General health.
Mr. Secretary, I think you're up first.
No, Madam Chair.
Oh, who was
Okay.
first?
Okay, first.
OFA, Mr. Ayers, floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just share my screen and get this up here. Just a moment, bear with me. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes,
We're good, Neil.
Okay.
Yep.
Good morning. I'm Neil Ayers with the Office of Fiscal Analysis, and welcome to the Fiscal Accountability Report 2022. Today, we're going to take a look at first an update of the current fiscal year, the FY23 budget. The FY23 budget had some significant allocations of American Rescue Plan Act dollars, ARPA, as well as some dollars carried forward from FY22. We'll take a look at those and potential impact of those on the out years. We'll then look at the general fund in the out years. We'll take a brief look at some of the economic trends that are underlying those projections. And then we will wrap up looking at the Special Transportation Fund, bonding, and some tax expenditures. Okay, for the current fiscal year, the budget that you adopted had a positive balance, general fund budget of $299 million. Last month, OFA and OPM adopted consensus revenue estimates. These increased the estimates for the sales and use tax by about $280 million. We'll look at that in a little more detail in another slide or two. Investment income was estimated up an additional $180 million. This is a result of a strong cash balance for the state, as well as significantly higher interest rates. The interest rates in the past were usually about half a percent, maybe about a year ago. Through 11/1, we're looking at about 3.2%, so about a six-fold increase in those rates. We made a downward adjustment for special revenue. This is largely related to online sports gaming. The Connecticut Lottery Corp's share of that overall market was less than was originally anticipated. And finally, everything else netted to a positive of about $120 million. The largest component of this is Medicaid, federal Medicaid related revenue, largely due to the continuation at the federal level of the pandemic emergency, which through their rules means that we get a higher matching rate on our federal funds. And this shows up on a couple different times in the report. I'll reference that again. Moving down to the expenditure side, we total lapses in agencies of about $144 million net, and deficiencies with ID'd about $82 million. So all told, at the end of the day, we're looking at a $931 million surplus. I will note up front, this is a report based on, or presentation based on the report we did last month, so it does not take into account the actions you took last week. Looking at that sales tax, generally sales tax is a pretty vanilla revenue stream, grows 2 to 3% most years. As you can see, that's not been the case in recent years. Last year, fiscal 21, we saw about a 10% increase, followed by an 11% increase. We're estimating for the full fiscal year for current year is a 7.6%, over and above those previous increases. Collections through October are about 9.7% above where we are last year. So it's continuing just very strong goods and services, as well as the impact of historically high inflation, which we will look at later on in this report. For the out years, we're projecting it to go back towards its historic norm of about 2.3%. Okay, for the expenditures, the net total expenditures are reduced by about $61 million, helping your bottom line. Starting up top, oops, sorry about that. Hang on. Starting up top, the largest area that we're seeing lapses is in retiree and state employee health services. This is largely related to a favorable rates the comptroller achieved for the Medicare Advantage program, as well as more retirees than anticipated transitioning directly to Medicare rather than to the health that we pay for. The next largest area is in the Medicaid program. Again, this is on the expenditure side of things, largely related to the continuing public health emergency and the continued increased higher federal rate, which means we have to spend less. The last one we really want to highlight is the personal services. We're seeing lapses across numerous state agencies totaling about $36 million for the general fund. And there's a variety of reasons for this. As you know, the state had a larger than historically normal rate of retirements at the end of the previous fiscal year. And there's also been numerous new positions provided for the agencies, and these agencies have had delays and problems in filling these. So we're looking at a lot of vacancies across numerous state agencies. There are also some very difficult to, well, we're finding to be very difficult to hire, such as doctors and nurses. The two agencies that we're seeing the highest lapses in personal services are Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, about $15 million, as well as the Department of Developmental Services. This is likely to be those hard to fill doctors and nurses. Looking down at the bottom, the technical $147 million, the budget that you adopted had gross lapses totaling about just under $150 million. Normally in the past, OPM in executing the budget would allocate these to various state agencies as savings targets. Budget that you passed in the spring included a provision that unless we were projecting deficiencies, OPM couldn't allocate those out. So we essentially had to take that 148 million and net it from the lapses up top, because there's no way that OPM has a mechanism to achieve those. Finally, the largest area of deficiencies, about $50 million, is in DSS and DMIS. This is spread across a large array of accounts. For the most part, it seems to be caseload driven, which is not unusual in those agencies. And finally, adjudicated claims, we're estimating about $30 million by the end of the fiscal year. No appropriation was made in the FY23 budget for adjudicated claims. We've seen about $12.5 million in claims already paid in this account. We anticipate additional claims as the year goes forward. So what does this mean for your budget reserve fund for the current biennium? We are anticipating the budget reserve fund to be at its 15% cap of general fund appropriations in both years. That's where it was when it started. Looking at FY22, in addition to the operating surplus of $1.2 billion, was a volatility deposit of $3 billion. As I'm sure you recall, the volatility deposit is related to a provision in statute that says that any collections in the estimates and finals portion of the income tax, as well as the pass-through entity tax, over a certain threshold can't be used for budget balancing purposes. It must be deposited in the rainy day fund. So combine those two for the first year of the biennium, there's $4.3 billion deposited into the rainy day fund. As it is at its cap, most of these, the mechanism in statute, it's over the cap, these funds, $4.1 billion, flows to the state employee and the teacher retirement system to pay down debt. Very similar story, smaller scale for the current fiscal year. We're expecting a $1.8 billion volatility deposit, or $930 million surplus we just discussed. So it results in, again, an additional $2.75 billion being paid down to the state employee and the retiree debt. As I said in opening this, you had significant allocations of both the FY22 dollars carrying forward, as well as allocations of federal ARPA dollars. What we wanted to do here is try to identify how these may pressure you as decision makers in putting together the upcoming biennial budget. So what we try to categorize is whether these expenditures were definitely ongoing, things such as salaries, private provider rates, things along those lines. Categories that were potentially ongoing. There's nothing in statute requiring it, but once these entities receive dollars, they may certainly be used to operating with them at that level. Some of these areas include higher ed, significant dollars in higher ed, tourism grants, certain childcare dollars, as well as some lower and early education initiatives. And finally, one time are things that are just one time that we don't expect to have pressure in the next year. So looking at the carry forward total, it's about just over $500 million. We identified 45% of this as being one time, 21% being definitely ongoing. So those are dollars you're definitely gonna have to deal with. And then 34% being potentially. These are, as I said, these are pressures that the recipients of those dollars may be coming to you to continue those in the upcoming biennium. The ARPA is a similar story with a larger pie. You have one time, 40%. The definitely ongoing is a smaller percent, just 7% that we identified. But potentially ongoing is 45%, total of about $30 million. The last pie, the uncertain, is related to the Invest CT dollars that were in OPM that weren't particularly defined in the budget revisions that you adopted. Now, for those of you who may, on appropriations, who may be subcommittee chairs or getting asked to be subcommittee chairs, this is one we may want to look at, because certain subcommittees are going to have much more pressure from the agencies within them that may want the dollars ongoing. The largest areas, over $360 million, is in higher education. There were a lot of potentially ongoing dollars that were provided to the constituent units. Next subcommittee, General Government B. This is mostly the dollars that are included in OPM's budget. Next down, as I said, elementary and secondary education. There's a lot of early childhood dollars that are potentially ongoing there, and there could be demand for. And finally, the last big one is the conservation and development, which includes a lot of tourism grants. Looking at the out years, the consensus revenues, or excuse me, fiscal accountability statute requires us to project these in a very particular way. We are required to start with the November consensus revenue for the revenue side of things, and to take a look at total expenditure estimate for the previous fiscal year, for the current fiscal year. We are then supposed to use that as the base for expenditures for our next fiscal year. We're then supposed to look at growth only in areas that are defined as fixed costs. These are things like debt service, entitlements, pensions, retiree health. We're only supposed to reflect the growth in that area. In most years, we are required to reflect what reductions in non-fixed cost areas would be necessary to bring the fixed and previous year expenditures in line with your November consensus. Then that's supposed to start all over again. First takeaway from this report is, if you have sat through this thrilling report in previous years, you will see a lot of red numbers here. This year, we are basically reflecting a positive structural balance, and no required reductions in the fixed cost expenditures in any of these years. We'll look at this a little further, but essentially revenue is growing faster than fixed cost. Your second takeaway of this, if you go down to the blue box in the bottom, should be a question of, okay, so how do we go from current year surplus of about $930 million to a balance of only $6.7 million in the first year of our next biennium, which is the budget puzzle that you will be faced with in the spring. This, in a nutshell, is it. The estimates swing a total of about $925 million between the years. Starting out at the top, to the positive, there's a structural balance of $376 million, difference between revenue growth and fixed cost growth. Next down, and these are the negatives. First, we made an adjustment for, as I had mentioned, some of those definitely ongoing carry forward costs. To the extent that they were in fixed cost categories, we built those into, those dollars aren't going to be available in fiscal 24, so we'd have to adjust for them. Next down is federal grants adjustment. Again, this is largely related to the continuation of the federal pandemic emergency. We are not anticipating that to keep going into FY24, so we will be spending more state dollars as well as receiving fewer federal dollars on the revenue side. There are also some Medicaid finalizations and timings that are fairly on the technical side, but also hurt you a bit there. Next down, revenue policy areas. The FY23 revised budget included about $315 million on the revenue schedule. There's an allocation of ARPA dollars for revenue that will not be available in 24. The next one down, the municipal revenue sharing MRSA account. This one's a little quirky. The FY22-23 biennial budget, the MRSA, before that, the MRSA expenditures had been an off-budget item. The FY22-23 budget brought those expenditures back and appropriated them under the general fund. And just for 22 and 23, transferred resources from that municipal revenue sharing account, which had been off budget, into the general fund. Balanced out, it was good for the biennium. However, that revenue transfer was only specified for those 2 fiscal years. So although those expenditures are ongoing in our projections on the expenditure side of the ledger, those dollars aren't available. Relatively easy fix for you as policymakers to say, okay, we're going to transfer those dollars because right now they're not matched against anything. And finally, down the bottom, there's about $230 million in other revenue policies net. There's about $180 million expiration of temporary measures, and about $50 million in scheduled tax reductions. I'm not going to get into the details of this, but there's much further detail in our report on what these encompass. So discussing that structural balance. In pretty much every other year I've done this report, these lines were inversed. The fixed cost growth was growing significantly faster than the revenue growth. I look back in 2019, sort of our last normal economy, if you will, report, and our revenue growth didn't look that different. It was about 2.8% back then. But our fixed costs, we were projecting to grow at about an annual average of about 5.4% for the out years in that report. So it's a significant change between these years. Okay, we will take a quick look at the revenue detail. We're basically projecting, first caveat, for the personal income tax, this does not include the dollars north of that volatility cap line. This is just growth in what can be used to balance the budget. So what we're looking at in these categories, income tax growing about 2.5%, business taxes about 3.7%, and net sales, as we discussed earlier, and we'll look more into, at about 2.3%. It nets out to between 2.3 and 2.9% growth over the course of the out years. Looking at the fixed cost side of things, the first thing I want to clarify, I mentioned we'll be going back to that federal pandemic extension of the emergency again. The growth in entitlements in FY24 is largely related to that. Feds will be spending a smaller share of their dollars on entitlements, Medicaid. We'll have to spend more of ours. So there's a bit of a jump in 24. The real takeaway from this, if you will, we're not used to seeing red numbers on this chart. State employee pensions and retiree health, as well as the teachers' retiree and health, had negative growth. We're actually projecting lower expenditures year to year. We'll take a look at that in just one second. And the last one I'd point out, that technical adjustment at the bottom, is us building in those definitely ongoing carry forward and ARPA dollars for the fixed cost categories. The previous chart was the marginal increases. We're just trying to give you an idea of, keep saying fixed costs all through this report, what exactly we're talking about there. It's about, I think for 23, about 52% of all expenditures. Working up from the bottom, the biggest categories, entitlements, which are the various cash assistance programs, but mostly Medicaid. Next up on that is debt service on our bond issuances. And the last two big categories are, again, state employee retirement and retiree health, and the teacher's retirement and health. The last category of any size is the hospital supplemental payments. These don't increase. That's based on the settlement that you all approved a few years ago. So what is not in fixed costs, you might ask? This is only 52%. The largest areas are town aid, state employee personnel costs, and higher education costs. Those are probably the bulk of the non-fixed cost. Okay, I mentioned the state employee retirement and teacher retirement, SERS and TERS. The box to the left is just showing you again the dollars I mentioned before. For the first year of the biennium, there was a total deposit to pay down those previously unfunded dollars by $4.1 billion in 22. Our current estimate for the current fiscal year totals about $2.7 billion. Total almost $7 billion this biennium will go to pay down our debt in those accounts. What does this mean to you guys as policymakers in adopting a budget next year? It means for fiscal 24, you will have to appropriate $340 million less for the actuarial determined employer contribution, or ADAC. The actuaries tell us we have to pay on these. So $340 million less in FY 25, and another on top of that, $183 million less in $340 in 24, an additional $180 in FY 25, for total lower payment of $524 million. I will note, this is just the marginal change from these deposits. Plenty of other factors, for good or bad, may come into what the actuaries tell us we have to pay in an ADAC, be it investment returns, COLA adjustments, and other things actuaries talk about. And I also would note that these reductions will continue through the 25-year amortization period. And they would also be helped by any additional surplus or volatility deposits that are made in future years. Before we leave the general fund, I want to take a look at some of the recent impact of the economy has had on our revenue projections. As you can see, and as you know, inflation's been high, 7.8% overall, still 6.3% when you take out food and fuel, the more volatile aspects. And this is well north of the Fed's target. So what's that mean on our revenue? Before you ask, we cannot directly isolate the impact of revenue on our of inflation on our revenue streams. There's a lot of different factors in there. But with this chart, we're trying to at least illustrate a correlation between high inflation and revenue growth. If you look at the first few years of this, in our previous era of relatively low inflation, doesn't seem to be a lot of correlation. Revenue's up, inflation's down. However, the last 3 years, there seems to be a definite correlation between a higher inflation environment as well as our withholding and sales tax performance. Now, mind you, plenty of other factors impact these numbers: wage growth, interest savings rates, as well as consumer demand. Now, looking at trends in retail sales, we tried to isolate a few consumer industries that generally sell taxable goods and services. Our overall performance in here, as noted before, this isn't the sales tax, but obviously directly related to it. It's retail sales. So about 10% in the current fiscal year. If you look at some of the components, some of the more traditional components of motor vehicle sales, general merchandise, which are your big box stores, furniture, electronics, not as good, but those are more in line with the traditional 2 to 3% sales tax that we've seen. However, looking at clothing, particularly growth online retailing, and the food services have been significantly increased. And I think that's definitely an underlying driver of our overall performance of 10.3%. Okay, lastly, before we leave the general fund, the budget reserve fund in the out years. We are covered FY23. I will say, as analysts in an era of surpluses, the budget reserve fund is the easiest thing for us to calculate. It's going to be at the cap of 15% of our estimated appropriations for the general fund. We are projecting a volatility deposit in each of the out years, which, because the rainy day fund is at its cap, we're anticipating, over and above those SERS and TERS deposits we've already done, additional deposits to pay down our long-term debt. Moving on relatively quickly to the Special Transportation Fund. Similar story overall. For the current fiscal year, FY23, the Transportation Fund budget as passed had about a $300 million surplus. This is improved by about $50 million. We're expecting lower debt service costs due to a favorable recent sale, as well as a reduction in issuance. And the other major takeaway in the current year is similar to the general fund. Both the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Department of Transportation are expecting lapses in personal services, total about $11 million. I think it's a similar story of higher than normal retirements coupled with difficulty in filling newly authorized positions as well. Looking to the out years, we are projecting positive balances in each of the out years, between starting almost 500 million and down to about $300 million. One of the differences between the general fund and the Special Transportation Fund, we discussed the general fund having a rainy day fund that can be no more than 15% of its appropriations. The Special Transportation Fund does not have that limitation. Basically, the balances accumulate. There is no mechanism in statute for dollars over a certain amount to be repurposed for anything else. So absent legislative action or an unanticipated deficit, these dollars will continue to grow. Looking at that as a percentage of appropriations, given the surpluses that we are, positive balances that we are projecting, we expect by fiscal 26, the cumulative balance of the Special Transportation Fund will essentially equal 1 year's total appropriations. Taking a look at some of the growth rates, out years we're expecting between 3.2, 3.1, and 3.8% growth in expenditures in total. The revenue is an interesting story in the Special Transportation Fund. If you look at the total revenue from FY16 to FY23, it's a relatively robust 6.7%. This is largely due to a policy that was adopted to phase in the transfer of 0.5% of the state sales tax from the general fund to the Special Transportation Fund. That phase in is done now. And there's also been a transfer of sales tax related to motor vehicle sales from the general fund to the Special Transportation Fund. So that's kind of underwritten the revenue growth. FY24, you're also seeing significant growth related, I think, largely to higher fuel taxes, as well as the implementation of the highway use tax. What we want to try to isolate for you is what's the underlying revenue growth if you take out that phase in of the sales tax components. So from FY16 to FY23, it looks a much less robust 0.8%. FY24 is still bumped up by the same factors of the highway use and the increased fuel prices. However, if we're expecting that phase-in finishes in FY '24 for the highway use tax. But what you're seeing in FY '25 and '26 is an underlying erosion in this revenue stream, as we're expecting fuel prices to go down, as well as all those people in Teslas aren't gassing up. And as more and more people are opting for electric vehicles, that is going to erode your tax base in the special transportation fund. As I said, we're projecting surpluses in the years going forward, but that is something that may have to be addressed in the out years, if you will. One of the other things the FAR statute requires us to take a look at is general obligation bonding. We have a lot more details in the overall report, but I just wanted to quickly go over what we're assuming for the out years here. We're expecting about $1.6 billion in projected new authorizations each year, which is roughly been in line with what we're doing. Coupling that with already authorized, priorly authorized allocations or authorizations, these would be a lot of the higher ed Yukon 2000 type ones. We're averaging about $1.8 to $1.9 billion in bond fund use. With regards to actual bond project spending, we peaked out at about $2.4 billion in 2016. This has tapered down under the current administration to about $1.4 billion in the current fiscal year. And lastly, the FAR statute asks us to take a look at tax expenditures. Tax expenditures are revenues that essentially we forego through exemptions, credits, or deductions. The biggest category by far here is about 60% of it is sales and use tax exemptions. Looking at these in a little more detail, the largest category of sales and use exemptions, about 40%, is in consumer goods. This is largely your food products, your groceries, prescription drugs, and motor vehicle fuel. We tax that in a different way. We don't levy a sales tax on it. The next biggest category of exemptions is government and nonprofit organizations. We don't tax ourselves. And the final big category at about 18% is service exemptions. This includes things like patient care and computer data processing services. For those of you who are interested in tax expenditures, OFA produces a comprehensive report detailing every single one of these. We produce that every other January. And that concludes this. Before we go, I would just like to thank everyone up at OFA. This is a pretty heavy lift to put this together every year, and not only for this project, but for the work they do throughout the year. You're really well served by some excellent public servants. And with that, I think we'll take questions and answers after OPM's presentation, and I will turn it over to capable hands of Mr. Beckham.
Thank you, Neil. Jeff, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you sharing your screen too?
Yes,
Okay,
I
go
hope
ahead.
so. Here we go. Can everyone see that?
Yep, we can see it. You might want to.
Okay. Here we go.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's nice to be with you all this morning. I am Jeff Beckham, Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management. The Office of Fiscal Analysis and the Office of Policy and Management have the same responsibility here to present a fiscal accountability report to you. We come at this task a little differently, as you will have seen and will see in our slides. We look at the data in different ways and present it sometimes differently. That said, some of what you're going to hear from me is what you heard from Neil, and you'll also see some things in ours that perhaps you didn't see in the OFA analysis. So between the two of us, hopefully you get a robust picture that you find useful. I'm going to walk through what we're looking at for fiscal 23 in terms of our projections. We're going to give you the estimates as required under the Act of the next 3 years in terms of revenue and fixed cost growth. We'll look at long-term liabilities and those fixed cost drivers also required by the Act, and a take on where we've been in the economy and where we are projecting. And then we'll have some conclusions and takeaways for you. Our next slide, slide 3, is a summary of our major points. We are projecting a surplus of about $1 billion this fiscal year, and the Special Transportation Fund has a projected surplus as well. Our fixed costs in the next 3 years, we're going to have a fixed cost will exceed our revenue in the first year of the biennium, FY24, but revenue growth will outpace fixed cost growth in fiscal 25 and 26. And this is the second consecutive report we've been able to highlight that trend for 25 and 26. It's very good news. It represents significant progress, including the reduction, as the next bullet indicates, $7 billion off of our long-term liabilities. Just compared to last year, we're $7 billion better in terms of our long-term liabilities than we were a year ago. We've made considerable progress, and Neil mentioned some of this in terms of our retiree health care as well as pension obligations, and those are the major drivers of that improvement. The fiscal reforms enacted in the 2017 session, which we have started to refer to around here as the guardrails, have played a major role in the improvement of our finances, and we do have a commitment to addressing these liabilities and living with our means. And as long as we continue to do that, we can continue to make progress. And as you know, the governor has proposed securing these guardrails beyond their expiration, the bond lock expiration in 23. We're going to talk about fiscal year 23 now. The first slide exhibit we have for you is our chart that shows up every month in our comptroller's letter, which you can see on our website going back many years. We project our surplus for the year in both the general fund and the STF. Noted on this slide, the estimate for the surplus has been affected by the November special session. We did use $45 million in current year surplus to fund the addition to the pandemic pay program. And the Special Transportation Fund was also impacted in as much as we extended the gas tax holiday, which is going to cost about $90 million in STF revenue. Other than that, we are showing surpluses for both funds, and we're on track to finish this year in the black. Our next slide shows where those general fund revenue changes that we show in the consensus revenue were attributed to. We went up in sales and use tax, investment income, changes in the federal grants. That number includes now it's 2 extra quarters of the enhanced FMAP that we're getting beyond that which we budgeted for. That's news since the session, and some growth in other sources as well. Next slide gives you some more recent revenue trends. Our consensus revenue adopted a pretty conservative outlook. We're still early in the fiscal year. We have here in the chart, within the chart, you have the adopted budget where we assumed growth rates for those tax types. The next column is where we landed with consensus revenue. And the last column, I hope you can see, if you're depending upon your orientation of your screen, is what our actual year-to-date experience has been in those tax types. We are ahead of collecting all of those tax types this year, ahead of our conservative consensus revenue estimates. So we are not yet seeing any downturn in revenue. If there is going to be a recession, we haven't seen it yet. But as we've indicated, we're still not even halfway through the fiscal year. So we're going to keep an eye on that as we move along. The next slide should detail our current recognized lapses and deficiencies. Overall, the good news is lapses exceed deficiencies, so that results in spending below the budgeted level. In the November special session, we did reduce some of those lapses there. About $45 million came out of line 21, which is the comptroller's retiree health care to pay for a pandemic pay. I recited that earlier. There's an impact on the lapse side. Also, the Medicaid lapse in line 16 does include the enhanced reimbursement that we're getting through March of 23. So just wanted to indicate we are showing those 2 additional quarters as being better for us in terms of expenditure. The next slide shows just the history of our budget reserve fund, deposits in, withdrawals out, where the totals are. See the big drop there in fiscal 10 when we drained the rainy day fund, I believe, the depth of the Great Recession. It's been building back over time, and you can see we're positive now at $3.3 billion, and we've had deposits every year with the volatility cap. So any amounts above that 15% obviously continue to be available to pay down our long-term liabilities. Going to summarize for you where we think we're headed in the next couple of fiscal years. Our first chart here shows you the fixed cost and revenue growth comparison. This is not, I want to hasten to add, a balanced calculation showing you where we are in terms of budget. It simply reflects that revenue growth compared to fixed costs. Fixed costs are about half the budget. They're not the entirety of the budget. As Neil alluded to in his remarks, there are discretionary non-fixed costs that are out there that also rise over time because of a variety of pressures. By historical standards, these fixed costs growth rates shown above are relatively modest. As we indicated before, we're positive in 25 and 26. The growth in the Medicaid expenditures there in that first line reflect the anticipated expiration of the public health emergency and the associated enhanced federal revenue. We'll move on. This graph just shows you that last slide graphically. We think in the first year, we still are behind in terms of revenue growth versus fixed costs, but that goes right side up in 25 and 26. We are getting more revenue than at a faster rate, growth rate than the fixed costs in 25 and 26. Good news, it means we've turned a corner, at least in terms of the fixed cost growth. Next calculation, next chart shows the Special Transportation Fund and where we are with fixed costs and revenue. Again, this is not a balanced calculation for the STF. Our preliminary current services estimate compared to consensus revenue shows balance through the next biennium. But as noted in the third bullet on this slide, without additional revenue or adjustments in transportation investments, we will have issues in the out years. In fact, you can see on page 21 of our report, our projection long-term outlook for the STF in its statement of financial condition. We do make some adjustments for things like the revenue cap, as well as we may have a different read on expenditures coming out of the STF. So I would draw your attention to our page 21 of our report for the STF. Going to talk about general fund revenues. We have on the next slide, slide 15, our consensus projections in terms of growth rates. As you can see at the bottom there on the right side, the growth rates, our actual growth rate in 22 was a robust 7% increase in revenue. It came down a little bit in the current fiscal year to 4%, but we are projecting it to go down 2.8% in fiscal 24 before recovering again in 25 and 26. You can see by tax type there, the actuals in 22, the projections for the out years. The next slide indicates our revenue gap due to policy changes next year. These are some enacted policy changes coming online that are costing us revenue in the general fund. You can see them listed there. I think OFA has a similar list in their report. This is part of why we have negative growth rate in 24. We do have some existing policy choices that have been made that will count against balance in 24. We're going to move now to our long-term obligations, our fixed cost drivers, and other topics. Our next slide indicates some efforts recently to reduce our long-term liabilities. Our long-term liabilities, and principally speaking, our pension obligations have seen a substantial reduction since last year's report by $7 billion. We've made additional deposits, as everyone knows, to those pension plans. The teachers' retirement unfunded liability has been reduced by $1 billion in the last year. And the teachers' funded ratio, teachers' retirement system funded ratio, has increased from 51% to 57%. I'll note that the state employee evaluation is expected this month, the new one. It will then reflect the $3.2 billion in additional deposits we made this year. So the $7 billion figure that we are down in terms of liabilities does not yet reflect the impact of the additional $3 billion SERS deposit that we're making this year. Next slide 19 shows our long-term liabilities in a pie chart form. Many of you've seen this before. Largest single item, of course, is bonded indebtedness at 31%, about $27 billion. The figures that's shown below the pie chart, the teachers' pension line state employee post-retirement health and life numbers are updated through the valuations we got in October. Neil alluded to the Medicare Advantage program negotiated by the Comptroller's Office, which is saving about $4 billion there. You see that change in the last column. And of course, the teacher's pension evaluation is updated. The state employee pension line there is not updated. That is last year's number. We will have a new number in a couple of weeks, and we do expect that to get better, actually, for the state employee pension. Next slide just shows our debt service, where we are with debt service. The debt service remains in a narrow range there over the last several years. We consider that a manageable level. The amortization schedule for the teachers' retirement system pension obligation bonds has been the biggest driver of that recent increase in the raw number there. But this is showing us debt service. This is something that we pay attention to, something we're aware of when we make choices about bond allocations on an annual basis, and something that the rating agencies pay attention to. So an important figure for us. The next slide, slide 21, shows you in graphic form your retirement system liabilities. The takeaway from this chart is that the bulk of the liability for both of our major pension plans is related to already retired employees. Those big blue sections there. This is the liability attributable to folks who are already out there on their pensions. So changes to active persons' benefits or other changes to the system related to active members of the systems would have only a modest impact on the overall liability, as you can see. Slide 22 gives you an update on where we've been with the SERS and TERS, the state employee retirement system and the teachers retirement system. The blue line on the left chart shows you where we were before the recent structural changes. You see a big spike was coming in the early part of the next decade in terms of our ADEC, our actuarially determined employer contribution. We've made some structural changes of which you are aware. These include reamortizing both of the pension funds over a new 30-year period, reducing the assumed investment return to 6.9%, a more reasonable, predictable level, transitioning the amortization to a level dollar method as opposed to level percent, and of course, smoothing our gains and losses out over 25 years. The orange line is where we got to with those structural changes. And then the green line is where we got to in terms of the payoffs or the schedule for payoff with the recent deposits that we've been able to make from the budget reserve. And the chart on the right blows that up a little bit. It shows you that we've made, in the last couple of years, we've made enough deposits that have saved $9.4 billion over the next 25 years. I can tell you that this same chart, the one on the right last year, would only have been about a $3 billion savings over the next 25 years. Just in the last year, we've been able to almost triple that savings with the deposits we've made from the budget reserve. The next slide shows you what the payoff schedule looks like for teachers' retirement and state employees' retirement systems. The ADEC goes down. If you make the ADEC every year, it will go down as indicated, and we will be done with it in 25 years or so. Slide 24 shows you the savings. I refer to this as the all things being equal slide. This shows you on the left the amount of the deposits that we've transferred from the budget reserve to the pension funds in those fiscal years. In 23, if we were to deposit all of what we have available, which is the surplus number plus the volatility cap deposits that have gone to the BRF, we'd have about $2.8 billion to deposit next summer. If you add them all up on the right, you see what the ADEC savings is. We are already at about $500 billion in savings just from the last 3 years. If we make that extra payment in 23, we'll be over $700 million in savings attributable just to those deposits. Now, of course, the actual actuarially determined employer contribution is affected by a number of factors, including the market performance of the funds, the COLAs that are paid to retirees that are driven by inflation, and other actuarial circumstances in terms of people coming into and out of those funds. So this isn't a dollar for dollar savings coming off the ADEC, but it is the ADEC would be this much higher if we hadn't been able, or might have been this much higher if we hadn't been able to make those deposits. So important progress made in the last few years on that front. Slide 25 shows us one of our historic cost drivers is Medicaid. You see there the general fund portion, the state portion is in green, the federal share, thankfully is much larger, is in gray, and then you have caseload indicated by the solid line. We are projecting a decline in caseload over the next couple of years. That's because to receive the enhanced federal reimbursement, states had to maintain coverage for Medicaid enrollees until the emergency period ends. Once the public health emergency ends, federal law requires that we resume redeterminations of eligibility, which we anticipate will result in a caseload decline in Medicaid. However, hasten to add that medical coverage will still be available for those who move off of Medicaid through other programs that we have, such as the Covered Connecticut program, and of course, our health insurance exchange, which offers subsidized coverage to those who qualify. So that's a read on where we are with Medicaid, one of our historic cost drivers. The next slide shows you that enrollment and cost trends graphically. On the left, you've got who's enrolled and what percentage of the Medicaid disbursement they consume, and then growth trends next to that. Overall spending growth in our state in this category is below the national average. The next slide, slide 27, is a slight departure from the fiscal accountability report in as much as the statute requires we report on fixed costs. But I did want to highlight for you some of the areas of discretionary spending growth. This shows you state aid to municipalities in the aggregate. It's got general government at the bottom, it's got education in the middle in the blue, and then it's got the teachers' retirement system cost to the state in the pink. As you can see, we've had some pretty robust growth recently, year over year from 21 to 22 and then 22 to 23. The blue part there is expanding as we move through time. That represents the ECS phase in. We're phasing in a new ECS formula over a 10-year period, adding hundreds of millions of dollars to the state's contribution to education at the local level and steering benefits to those districts most in need. Slide 28 is another recent cost driver for us in terms of discretionary spending. We've got state support for higher education. Now, this slide is both UConn and the colleges and universities combined. But as you can see there, we've got in the orange bars there the additional state funds, principally surplus and carry forward, and then the ARPA funds that were made available the last 2 years. If you add those up and look at the compound annual growth rate, it's about 14% increase since 2020. That growth rate is likely unsustainable without significant trade-offs in other parts of the budget. I can tell you I've had conversations with both higher ed systems. In fact, those conversations are ongoing. And they understand that those one-time resources, which have supported them, are not expected to be available in the next biennium. So we've got some work to do there with our higher ed units, and we're doing that work now internally. We'll move now quickly through our read on the economy, some recent trends where we've been. This shows our Connecticut employment situation. The steep drop on the left was early 2020 when the pandemic struck. We lost about 289,000 jobs and we were almost back to recovering our pre-pandemic job loss. We're at about 98%. You can see in the last month for which we have data, which is October of 22. So we're almost back to where we were job-wise. So that's good news. If you highlight just this year, we've added jobs every month this year for a total of 32,000 new jobs in our state for calendar 22. The next slide shows you our employment recovery by sector. Sectors are listed on the left. Job losses are in blue, the recovery in red on the right, and the percent of where we are by sector compared to the pre-pandemic number on the right. So we've made good progress getting somewhat back to normal in terms of employment. The next slide shows you where we are relative to our neighbors as well as to the nation. We're about in the middle of the pack with our neighbors, behind New Jersey and Massachusetts, but ahead of New York and tied with Rhode Island. So our employment recovery comparable to our neighboring states in the region. Our next slide, 34, shows you where we are with gross state product. Our gross state product took a big dip with the pandemic. We've been slowly climbing back, and we have recently, as of the last quarter, gotten back to real gross state product level prior to the pandemic. So we've gotten a good response in the economy since the pandemic, and we're back to where we were. I've just got a couple more slides to show you. The first slide is our credit ratings. We are proud that we've received a credit rating upgrade from all major credit rating agencies in the last 18 months. The last one coming just a couple of weeks ago from S&P. The credit rating agencies have told us that our upgrades were due to our strong financial performance, building up of our budget reserve fund, those pension fund payments that made that unprecedented and historic progress on those unfunded liabilities possible, and our strong provisions that we continue to have to promote our fiscal discipline. Over the years, the rating agencies have cited things for us as negatively affecting our rating, including our high fixed costs for debt, pension, and other obligations, and any weakening of our budget management policies. And to reiterate, the governor has stated his interest in continuing the existing financial guardrails through the bond covenants. Our last slide is our takeaway slide. Just reminding you, we do have a general fund operating budget of almost $1 billion this year. Our rainy day fund is full. Our revenue growth is outpacing our fixed cost growth in fiscal 25 and 26, probably the headline in terms of the fiscal accountability report, finally getting fixed cost growth under control. Long-term liabilities have been reduced $7 billion since last year. And as I indicated, we still have another valuation on SERS coming in a couple of weeks, which might increase that number. I want you to take away this final point is probably the most important takeaway from my perspective. The fiscal accountability report does not present the entire budget picture for the upcoming biennium. It only presents fixed costs versus revenues. The fiscal note from OFA, when the FY23 budget adjustments were passed in May, projected a general fund deficit of about $800 million in fiscal 24. And I believe Neil on his slide number 10 had a very similar figure in representing where he was in terms of structural deficit. So we do have a lot of work to do. We are engaged in that work right now at OPM. We will be passing the baton to you in February, and we will both be about the business of making this all work out and balance in the end. So with that, we'll conclude and we'll try to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I have a couple of questions to begin with. I want to go back to Neil, your MRSA comments, and could you elaborate a little bit about MRSA, where we stand and how it impacts numbers, that in particular when Jeff is talking about the dollars that are that we're off on. So if you could go through MRSA again.
Sure. Like I said, that was kind of quirky. Prior to the current biennial budget, fiscal 22 and 23, there were both revenue dedicated to MRSA and expenditures allocated to MRSA. They were outside appropriated funds. When you originally adopted the biennial budget, a decision was made to bring those expenditures and appropriate them back under the appropriated funds. For whatever policy reason, that was the decision that was made. The statute regarding, and so the expenditures were brought into the appropriated funds. The statute also brought the related revenue back into the general fund, but only for fiscal 22 and 23. I mean, it programmatically, it was a wash, it was balanced. Outside the appropriated funds, you brought it into the appropriated funds, it was balanced there. However, our report, and I assume OPM's as well, is projecting those expenditures are continuing into the out years. However, we have to report this based on what the current statute says, and the current statute only transferred the revenue back in for 22 and 23. So for those out years, 24 or beyond, you essentially have that MRSA revenue still going to the off-budget MRSA account, but no expenditures against it. So presumably, if you are making decisions to balance a budget, an easy one early on would be to bring those back in, that $276 million of revenue back in to help balance the expenditures that are already in your appropriated estimates. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, it's kind of a quirky one.
I think it makes sense, but I just want, when we're talking about an $800 million deficit, that is in part because of the revenue that has not been brought back in for years 24 and on, fiscal year 24 and on.
I think for you as decision makers, that's the low hanging fruit.
Okay. Thank you for that. And Jeff, I have a question for you relative to the payment of the pensions. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Yep. Did you include the decrease in the ADAC payments for the pensions in your report?
Yes, we had a slide in which we teased out what the decrease, well, if you can attribute as a dollar figure to the impact on our liability of the deposits that we've made. But as I indicated, all things being, that's if all things are being equal, you might get that savings. The ADAC is determined by a variety of factors, not just how much principal you have out there, but what is the performance of the fund? How much is it earning? What kind of outlays are you making based on COLAs paid to retirees? What's happening with the population actuarially in the fund? So the ADAC has a lot of moving parts, but yes, we did have a slide which showed you if you could attribute it's about 500 or close to $500 million so far of the deposits we've made to date, reduces our ADAC liability to that extent.
Oh, okay.
In other words, it would be higher, but for those deposits.
Right there. Okay, that.
Right. Joan, you had to mute yourself. There you go. Thank you for that, Jeff. I just want to make sure that people see that what we have done relative to the payment down of our pension debt has decreased operating expenditures or general fund expenditures. I remember Representative Walker and I having this discussion when we had seen previous budgets on paying down that we were lockstep in paying down those payments and not extending them any farther than where they are today. So I just want to make sure that that's out there. So Representative Walker.
Oops, thank you. Thank you, Secretary and Neil, for your presentation. There are several questions that I have, but the main thing that I hope we take away from this is that we are going in the right direction in many of the things that we've already done for the last couple of years. And when you talk about concerns about things in education and higher education and how we need to pare it back, I think we're going to have a lot of conversation about that, because if you think about it, that's the way we build our workforce. And so we've got to make sure that those things are sustained. I probably will have some more questions later on, but I'll let other people have the opportunity to make their questions. So thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Minor.
Thank you, and thank you to both OPM and OFA for their presentations. I'm delighted to hear that the governor has taken a position with regard to the guardrails. There's no doubt in the 22 years that I've been in the legislature that this is probably one of the best fiscal presentations I think I've heard. And it is in no small way a result of the changes I think that maybe it was Jeff Beckham alluded to in 2017, 2018. So I am happy to hear the governor take that position, and I'll be rooting for him from the sidelines in the upcoming budget cycle. Having said that, I also listened to a presentation from John Garagosian relative to the declining numbers in the Connecticut State Police ranks. And have to say that I'm a little concerned that there's got to be a number of causes for that. Some of it may be policy. Some of it may be how we stack up against other states with regard to wages and benefits and those sorts of things. So Jeff, if you could, without getting too deeply into the budget that you're still working on, is there going to be anything that the legislature would be looking at this year with regard to probably not retention, but more trying to recruit certain employees of certain value because of what's happened over the last couple of years with regard to retirement? So I can think of DEP, I can think of the Connecticut State Police. I'm sure there are other agencies where there have been large lapses like DEMIS and that sort of thing.
Well, yes, I can tell you we are at the table with the state police on their contract. As you know, we negotiate with them outside of the CBAC negotiation that we had earlier this year. And we will be bringing that to the General Assembly, and we are discussing with them ways to we can change their compensation package to better recruit and better retain state police. I'll put it in general terms. I can't talk about it obviously in specific terms until we announce that, but that is forthcoming. That will be coming to the General Assembly. We hope will be coming to the General Assembly next session.
All set.
Well,
Senator
thank you.
Minor?
I mean, I think Senator Austin, you and Chairman Walker have been talking about, I think it's been a couple of years, how the state agencies have lagged behind on the rehiring process, that the money's been appropriated year after year after year. So this isn't a 2022 phenomenon, I don't think. But anyway, I'll be interested to watch that as well as the protection of the guardrails. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative France, do you have any questions?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Senator Fonfaro?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Neil and Mr. Secretary, for your very thorough presentation. Just two things quickly. My more detailed questions can wait to another day. With respect to Neil or Jeff, one of the objectives of the changes we made in terms of volatility, et cetera, was to begin to reduce the percentage of fixed costs occupying the overall budget. And can you tell us if you foresee, right now we're at 52%, and that means for everybody here that for every dollar, 52 cents of it is spoken for before we even wake up in the morning. And that's just not good economics under, I don't care who's looking at it. So that's number one. And then number two is more of a comment. I think one slide addressed the economy. It's not a criticism, just an observation. And maybe we ought to have another meeting like this regarding, you know, all those revenues are, or most of those revenues are because somebody's working and they're paying taxes on their income, they're paying taxes on their purchases, and on and on and on. And, you know, businesses. And we don't talk about how to grow the economy in the legislature very much. We don't. And, you know, we act, I think, sometimes like money does grow on trees and we can just go out in the backyard and you know, get it off the trees. But so I would hope that we can spend some time, particularly on the finance side, but I think it's important on the appropriations side as well, that we understand what we're doing as a legislature. I don't think we should leave it entirely to the administration, policy-wise, to grow our economy in Connecticut. That helps everybody. So Neil or Jeff, you can respond to the percentage of fixed costs in terms of our overall budget?
So I can take a crack at that one. Like I said, it's about 52% is fixed cost. I think the takeaway is what we're projecting for fixed cost growth in the out years is about 1.6%. Like I said, I went back to 2019 to take a look at that report, and that number was averaged 5.4% in the out years in that report. So I think you've definitely seen some of the actions that you've taken that have tamped down that growth significantly. That's a big difference, and that's pretty much the reason the delta between revenue growth and fixed cost growth has flipped.
Right, but I guess my question is more about, and this is important for the legislature, we're being asked, and I hope we will support the continuation of the restrictions, but there's got to be a benefit for that, right? There's got to be a benefit. One of them is that we're paying less to ADEC, but the other is that we see that less, fixed costs are not just debt, but debt is an important part of it, and being able to reduce that, and so we can see that what will it take to get under 50% of our obligations being related to fixed costs?
I don't know if this is a direct answer to that. This dynamic of fixed costs versus revenues is kind of unique to the requirements of this report. You as policymakers come in and adopt a budget that very likely has growth in what are non-fixed. So it's kind of a point in time snapshot, because there are then policy decisions that are made that affect that balance between fixed and non-fixed. Like I said, I think we have seen reduction in the fixed cost. The biggest one we called out in our report was CSRS and TERS, but I think that we had a slide in, we've been bonding significantly less over the past 5 or 6 years, which I think is going to help reduce your debt service costs as well. And I believe OPM had a chart indicating Medicaid growth, putting my old, I used to be the Medicaid analyst, was pretty significant, call it 7, 8, 9 years ago. That area, through the management and some policies you have adopted, has come back in line with a more normal growth rate. So I think there's a lot of steps you've taken in a lot of different areas that have impacted that.
Maybe an adjustment in the statute regarding, or unless both offices want to add more in the future, that regarding that percentage and why, if it's growing, of terms of fixed costs, why, if it's reducing. Right now, we just say 52%, but we don't have a real sense of, okay, what's driving that, and how, what are we taking steps to reduce that number? For me, that's the most important thing, is reducing that percentage.
Sure.
Thank you.
All set, John?
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Representative Scanlon? We'll come back to Representative Scanlon if he has any questions. Senator Martin?
I just have one quick question regarding the carry forward expenditures. Forget what page that's on, but why is there just an assumption that these definite, I guess, slide 7, and this is for Neil, the definite ongoing expenditures. Can you just describe that a little bit more as to what those expenditures are, Neil?
Sure. There's no firm definition in statute of what these are. We were trying to categorize them in a way to help you guys as policymakers going forward. For definitely ongoing, we were looking at things that were built into wages or salaries, because presumably, if we provide a wage increase based on a carry forward, we're not going to subsequently take that one back. I think some is it a DDS settlement we funded in current year, I believe, with some carry forward or some ARPA dollars, as well as we increase some private provider rates. Presumably, in the normal practice of things, we're not going to pull those rates back going forward. So as I said, there's not a hard and fast definition anywhere in statute. It was our analysts trying to just give you a picture of the potential pressures you have. But I think those areas are probably largely categorized.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Senator Austin.
Thank you, Senator Martin. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll try and be quick. Question for Neil. In the STF, you have, I guess, 536 million in all other revenue. Can you explain what factors into that?
We can get a breakout for you on that.
Okay. All right, thank you. And in that, I guess this is referring back to Senator Martin's question. I guess if you come up with about $1 billion in definite and probable carry forward in ARPA funds, that is not included in that 800 million proposed deficit in 2024. Is that correct? And I guess that's both you and Secretary Beckham.
A portion of it is we built it in where those allocations were in our fixed cost categories.
Right.
So we built that in, I think it was 129 million or so.
But not the probable, or more
Correct.
likely than not.
We did not build any probable, but just those that we categorized as definitely ongoing in fixed cost categories.
Okay, and that I believe we have an additional 417 million in the new CBAC deal and employee salaries, if I understand correctly, are outside the fixed cost category. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And just one more quick question for Secretary Beckham. In the gap delay, I believe you have 1.1 billion and then reducing to 700 million in 2024. Can you explain the difference in those figures, please?
I'm sorry, what are you referring to?
The gap delay in adopting the gap standards. I think
that's costing 120 million in the next fiscal year. I think that's on our slide.
Yeah, I'm talking about, and maybe I've got the wrong. I have too many PowerPoints up here.
Yeah, it's line 20 of slide 16 in our presentation. That's the resume funding of the gap deficit in fiscal 24 is about $120 million item.
Okay. Do we know the total cost of the delay? Because I believe we've been putting that off for many years.
I think the 120 million figure is where we would be in 24 if we're on track to pay it off according to schedule.
Okay, but we haven't.
Well, that's where we are today. We've made a couple of payments over the years. I think there was one in the Malloy administration, one in the first year of the Lamont administration. We haven't made it in a couple of years.
Okay, thank you. And I one more question. The 6.9% return we're assuming. Do we know how this has performed since we adopted that? I know we saw a significant downturn in terms of the markets during the.
I know that generally speaking, is it by calendar year or fiscal year? Fiscal year, the last fiscal year, it was a very good year. I think it was in the 20% range of 21% returns. This fiscal 21. So fiscal 22 was not as good a year. We were down, I think, about 7. But we do smooth those over 25 years. Do we know where?
I would just say that.
I thought it was smoothed over 5 years, Jeff. I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Kathy.
Moved over 5 years. So like Greg Messner from OPM. So you're correct, Senator. The returns are smoothed over 5 years for CSRS. The resulting, whether there was a loss or a gain in the pension, those gains or losses are amortized over 25 years.
If I could just add one more point. I'm Tom Pierre at OPM. The past 10 years, the return on our pension funds have been 7.28%. So that is above the 6.9. If you look a little longer term, 20 years, it's 6.68. So it's slightly below the 6.9, but it's close.
But far more realistic in terms of overall return.
Correct.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting into the members. Please remember that you have 2 questions and do not make them multiple questions in each question. That means 2 questions, only 2, not 4 or 5 as question 1. Okay, so here we go. Representative Dathan.
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you to OFA and OPM for your presentations. They were very thorough. It's great. 2 questions. First of all, within the lapses, have you all done an analysis of the lapses relating to personnel costs and delays in hiring compared to what was budgeted?
I'll take a crack at that one. I think we identified lapses in the general fund totaling about 36.7 million in personal services and an additional 11 million under this special transportation fund lapses in personal services.
Great, thank you. Do we have a number? Sorry, I don't want to have this be my second question. So we don't know how many people that is.
I will say OPM was required to and has created a report that shows staffing levels, including vacancies. I'd defer to the secretary on that.
Yeah, we can get you where we are with that. We actually plan to fill vacancies as they are needed to do the work of our agencies. We have faced in the last year or so since the pandemic an historically tight labor market. It's been true around the country and not just in government, but in private sector as well. We took account of this when we looked at the CBAC agreement that we did back in the winter and spring. We tried to build in some more favorable terms for those professions like nursing and engineering and IT, where we knew we were going to have some trouble filling. We have more recently convened interagency teams to work on this issue of hiring vacant positions where they are most needed. DAS has undertaken special recruitments and special efforts above and beyond what they've normally done to try and get more people in. And our Office of Labor Relations has worked with our collective bargaining agent partners to try to waive certain provisions in the collective bargaining agreements that slow down the hiring process a little bit in terms of appeals and that sort of thing. And I also understand that DAS is probably working on potential legislation that might facilitate the hiring process. So we're aware of the issue. We've been working on it very hard, and we are seeking to fill all the vacancies that our agencies need to do their business.
Okay, great. My second question is around Medicaid and entitlements. You talked about with the redetermination that there would be a caseload decline. Have you all done an analysis of that relating to what that might be in terms of regular Medicaid versus maybe 1115 waivers, what the amounts are, and if those differences have been allocated into increasing funding in covered Connecticut and on the exchange for people who might not be part of that redetermination process, so that they won't see any sort of gaps in coverage if they don't qualify for Husky going forward.
So we will be taking a closer look at that as we move forward to make sure we address that in the budget. But we do have, as I indicate, the other programs available should there be folks who would be redetermined to be ineligible for the Medicaid program. But that is something that we are working on in the budget process to make sure that the number that we put for Medicaid is the one that will meet the need.
Got it. And So do you analyze that between sort of standard Medicaid and the 1115 waivers?
Yes, we have a staff that works closely with DSS on all those details. And we'll have information for you when we get to the budget presentation in February.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Little skirting on the edge there, Representative Dathan. Representative Abercrombie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Following the line of questioning from Representative Dathan around the Medicaid, I'm surprised at how you are putting a number in there for the amount of individuals that may not qualify. I'm not sure how you're determining that in your slides. I also want to make sure that everybody is aware that the public health emergency has been extended into next year for Medicaid. So the 6.2% increase is going to continue for at least one period right now, but the talks from CMS are it will be going into 2 terms next year. So I want my colleagues to make sure they understand that. And then also keep in mind, there's a roughly around 200 million that will be carried over from Medicaid with the savings from this year. So as you talk about individuals moving to the exchange or to cover CT, there's about 10,000 Husky A adults that we never put back on Husky. So you need to keep that in mind when you talk about the balancing of these individuals. So could you either Neil or Mr. Secretary kind of explain how you're looking at redetermination right now and coming up with perhaps some numbers of how many individuals will not qualify for Medicaid going into next year?
So the redetermination is something that will happen in the future. So I don't have an experience to report to you. This is an estimate on our part that when these rules change, that this will be a phenomenon we will see. As you can see on our chart, we would project the level of caseload to be about what it was in 20 or 21. So it's a natural regression from the peak of the pandemic. It's just a guess. It's just an estimate that we are anticipating. But when we get deeper into it, we'll have actual numbers to be able to provide you. And we will obviously build those into our budget when we present to you in February.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So you're basing your numbers on 2021 Husky numbers at this point.
I'm just telling you that our chart shows that's where we'd be in 25. We'd be at about, if you just look at our slide 25, we'd be at about the level we were in 21.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Fazio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Beckham, at the end of your presentation, you had mentioned a $800 million deficit figure. Obviously, in the OFA report, with the fixed costs and the revenue numbers, they anticipate approximately a zero balance in fiscal year 24. Can you just expand on that negative $800 million number that you mentioned? I'm not sure if I understood it fully.
The $800 million figure I mentioned is OFA's number from last year. It was their estimate of what the operating in that case, operating deficit would be in fiscal 24. If you look at slide 10 of OFA's report today, they show a $925 million gap between what they were calling the structural deficit, I believe, on that page. We're in that ballpark in terms of anticipating what our actual operating issue is at the moment. That's something we're working through internally to get to balance. I have to get to balance before I can do anything else in terms of policy changes to recommend to the governor, whether it's to spend more money or to cut taxes. And we're not there yet, I can tell you. We've been working hard on that for some time, and we are hundreds of millions out of balance as I sit here today looking at current services and the consensus revenue projection. Again, this fiscal accountability report speaks only to fixed costs, which are only about half the budget. There's another half that's discretionary spending that rises all the time due to various pressures. So that is what OFA was looking at in the spring. Obviously, Neil can speak to what they were looking at then and now. I'm not in a position to tell you what our numbers are yet for current services. We haven't finished our discussions internally, nor have we had them with the governor yet. So we will get there. We will present a balanced budget to you in February, I promise. and we will go forward from there.
But so basically, if you include a realistic estimate of non-fixed costs extended out to fiscal year 24, it would be reasonable to assume that that's in deficit now, and obviously the budget will need to fix that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All set, Senator? All set, Senator Fazio? Senator Onmar?
Thank you, Madam
Questions,
Chair.
sir.
Question number one. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, OPM and OFA, for your presentation. Very useful, helpful, and we can speak for hours on this. The Special Transportation Fund, there's been conversations earlier about insolvency risks, and then right now, I think we are not necessarily moving in the right direction. Would you be able to talk a little bit about that, if you could?
Yes. If you look at our actual report, not just our slideshow here, page 21 of our report shows our current read of the STF Statement of Financial Condition for the next 3 or 4 years. We do show it in deficit in fiscal 26 under current trends. We make a variety of adjustments, which we lay out on that page in terms of revenue and in terms of expenditures. And we do have, we are solvent for the biennium, 24-25, and we have large cumulative balance going forward through this decade without any changes. But we will need changes, as our slide indicated, to stay in operating surplus in the out years. So we are going to have to take a look at revenue changes or investment expenditures that we make out of the STF.
Thank you. And my second question, Madam Chair, I'm just going to change it because Representative Abercrombie and Representative Dathan had asked and actually informed about that question in my comments. So I'm just going to say to OPM and OFA, based on looking at the entire current condition, what are the 2 or 3 things that the policymakers should be looking at a deep look at in this upcoming session?
I think you just alluded to one, the long-term, and I alluded it in our presentation, the long-term trend of revenues for the Special Transportation Fund. As I said, it's maybe more of an out year issue. That this transportation fund has been largely built on motor fuels tax, and that is got a negative trajectory. And as more people are driving electric cars, that's where you're not going to be getting your gas tax there. And I think that's a longer term problem. As Jeff said, depending on how you look at it, you're okay for the biennium and you have a large cumulative balance, but that's an underlying concern going forward that at some point or another will have to be addressed. If the Secretary has anything to add.
Yes, I would say that we are grappling with, and we've both of our presentations have alluded to this. We are grappling with the fact that we are not expecting to have all of the federal revenue available to us that we've had the last couple of years, and we've not necessarily going to have the surplus carry forward available to us in future years. So making sure that we right size our budget to take account of getting back to a more normal situation where we have to rely on our own revenue sources is going to be a major challenge for us. I put a couple of slides in just to illustrate that. We've had significant growth in municipal aid. We've also had some complicated changes to the way we fund municipal aid, and Neil alluded to that in an answer he gave earlier. We're both going to have to make some choices about that going forward in terms of where the revenue is coming from, where it's going for municipal aid. I indicated in the slide that the higher ed situation is one where we're going to have to take a hard look at making sure that those systems are funded within the means of the state to support them, and that those one-time revenues will not be recurring. So those are 2 big challenges for us. And again, spending discipline will be important going forward, and trying to maintain the fiscal guardrails and the fiscal progress that we've made the last several years is our big challenge.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the question is to Neil, but it would be to Jeff as well. I wonder if you could unpack the revenue stream for the Special Transportation Fund a bit. That is, as I understand it, we had dedicated some of the general, the sales tax revenue from the general fund and diverted it to the Special Transportation Fund. If that is true, what dollar amount does that account for, and how long would that continue? Given that, well, how long would that continue? Given trend lines in the trajectory of that particular funding source.
I'll take a first crack at it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Say what the U.S. policymakers did a few years back was dedicate a 0.5% of the general sales tax to the Special Transportation Fund, and that was ramped up over a series of years. The chart I had on the growth of the Special Transportation Fund from 16 to 21, it looked fairly positive. That was a ramping up of that policy. You also dedicated the sales tax related to motor vehicles, previously been under general fund, moved it to the transportation fund. That helped a positive trend for those. I don't off the top of my head have the exact figures for those. We can get them for you, but those are in statute and going forward in perpetuity unless you change them somehow. But now that those have ramped up, somebody just texted me, the sales tax transfer is about $900 million. Now that those have ramped up, you will only see any sales tax related growth in those areas. That's why we tried to tease that out and show you what the underlying traditional revenue sources turning negative in the out years.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would agree with what Neil said. It is about $900 million in the current year for both the sales tax and those numbers. Sales tax is growing at about 2%, a little over 2% in the next couple of years. We anticipate. So we anticipate that will grow a little bit as we move along. The sales tax portion of the revenue to the Special Transportation Fund.
So would it be accurate to say then that the Special Transportation Fund is funded right now by taxes on fossil fuels and on a dedication of our general sales tax revenue, given your earlier remarks, Mr. Beckham? Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I may have other questions later.
Thank you. Representative Fiscal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. My question goes to debt service. You both emphasized the importance of debt service with our rating agencies. And it all seems to be lumped into one: our bonding debt with our retirement debt for both state employees and teachers' retirement. Do the agencies look at our bonding debt separate, or do we have a separate appropriation maybe for our bonding debt as opposed to lumping it all into one? Is there some kind of a figure on that?
Yes, the Appropriations Act has a separate line item for debt service, which is essentially our general obligation bond debt service. We also have, it's embedded in a line item, I think, but the ADEC, which we pay on the pensions, is a separate item.
Thank you.
Comptroller's office, right?
And then just curious for my second question would be, there's been a lot of questions about rehiring and the historic retirement trend that took place last fiscal year. As you say, we have to be careful of our expenditures going forward. Has there been an effort to, maybe not use the word attrition, but maybe downsize the overall state employee labor force with improvements in technology or procuring equipment or something like that? Is there a directive or an effort or an energy to actually downsize the labor workforce in the state of Connecticut?
There is no policy of which I am aware that is attempting to, through attrition or other measures, bring down the numbers of state workforce. We are trying to fill every position that is vacant that we need to deliver services to the public. There's no policy to enforce attrition or freeze hiring or anything like that. There has been some natural over time, I would say, just observe as a casual observer over time. Yes, to the extent that you make IT investments and other efficiency improvements, you may reduce the need over time for positions, but there's been no particular specific policy or directive that's been issued to shrink the workforce to save money.
Thank you, and thank you again for your presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Ferrara.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Just a quick question for you, Neil. I think a couple questions earlier had asked about the carry forward spending and the ARPA allocations. And I looked in the report, but do you all have a full list that you could share with the committees of what you categorized in all of those estimates? Would that be something you could share with all of us?
Not right now up here, but yes, of course, we can get that to you.
Okay, that would be very helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Meskers.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Two questions. First question, on the outstanding debt of the state, is there or has there been a duration policy in light of interest rate policy from the Fed? So one, knowing we've got the refund and the interest rate expense, has OPM developed either any recommended guidance on duration on the debt in terms of managing it? Because a lot of it obviously is refied on a regular basis.
I can take it. That's actually a treasurer's office issue. They would promulgate a policy on that. I don't think we have a separate policy at OPM on that. They go to market at their leisure or when they think it's most propitious for the state. And that's policy that the treasurer's office would have.
And you would not opine on that policy?
Well, we're represented on the Investment Advisory Council. We do speak to them on a regular basis.
Okay. Going forward, I'd like guidance on that in terms of duration, given the interest rate cycles. You know, whether we're going to be in an 8 or 10 or 12-year duration on the outstanding stock of debt is important when we look at the refi risk. But that's the first. I want to ask for follow-up on that. I don't want to get sanctioned by my chair. The second question is on policy. Is there any can you give us a balance, a review of the SPF? Maybe not today, but going forward, it would be helpful from OPM, from my point of view as a legislator, to get an idea of the sources and uses of transportation funds in states of comparable, outlays in terms of revenue sources, et cetera, whether it comes from you or through the DOT. If we're facing, as I'm hearing from you, a concern related to electric vehicles versus gas sales tax as a source of revenue, I think the concern is where are we versus other states in the replacement of that revenue stream, and where are the general sources coming from away from us? Because as legislators on a policy basis, we want to know what part of the funding base we're going to appropriate to maintain the infrastructure on the transportation fund.
We can get you some detail on that.
Okay, perfect. Those would be two things I think would be of high interest to me, but thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Representative France.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And a follow-up question to the last one related to the Special Transportation Fund. Do you have the numbers from OFA on the 30-year projection on the STF, since That's the way we look at long-term expenditures. And the reason I ask is my recollection, so about a decade ago when I came into the legislature, it was about $70 billion. The last number I heard was closer to $60 billion. But I see an upward trend in revenue and what that new projection might be.
And Troy, did you get a 30-year projection from our office?
No, it was
typically do
something
it
that was projected under the Malloy administration when he put out his transportation plan and what the 30-year projection was. And then a few years ago, my last recollection was it was closer to 60 billion, but I didn't know. It looks like the trend is a positive trend. And if we looked at that, that number of where that is headed.
I'll have to talk to our folks. I don't think we do a 30-year, maybe usually a 10-year, but I can check with our folks and get back to you. But I think the secretary said the underlying in the out years, and I try to emphasize that the underlying revenue is starting to have a negative trajectory. So the numbers are good now, but there are some, that's what I tried to highlight, there's some concerns in the out years.
And I heard that as well. And that is my concern, is that if the numbers, my recollection is correct, then what we're doing is deferring work within the transportation fund as opposed to maintaining the roads and the bridges and other things. And so I think it's something that the legislature needs to take a close look at, what that long-term projection is and how to put out a plan going forward that is going to provide the most cost-effective maintenance of our roads, bridges, and other infrastructure based on that projection. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And to be clear, all information that has been asked for by my colleagues would go to the administrator for appropriations, Susan Keene, who will then transmit that information to both the Appropriations Committee and its members and the Finance, Revenue and Bonding Committee and its members, just so that everybody will get the same information. Representative Dathan.
Just going for the second time, with a couple of questions, if that's okay, Madam Chair. So one quick question I had was, Neil, when you were talking in one of your slides about non-fixed growth, you had town aid as one of the things there, higher ed and state employees. And I just wanted to get an understanding. So benefits and salaries for state employees considered non-fixed, is that right?
Benefits, state employee pension and health are fixed. I think it's the salaries that are considered non-fixed. We can get you an exact list of them.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the sort of reasoning behind not including employees as fixed.
The FAR statute didn't define exactly what were in those pots. And it was a discussion between, after the FAR statute was passed, between our office and OPM, what would be considered in each pot. And I don't want to speak for OPM, but if I remember, their argument at the time was they have control over staffing levels in the agencies, and therefore they're not truly fixed.
Okay. Would love to get a little explanation on that a little bit better. If you can give that analysis of the listings to the administrator, that would be great. My second question really is, it sounds like for every dollar we pay down our liabilities in terms of the ADAC contributions, we are saving like $1.20 in, does that sound like a reasonable correlation between the two items? For every advance payment we make on our long-term liabilities, paying down our debt, it's giving a future savings of about, I don't know, I'm just trying to get the sort of metric between the two items.
If I could just interrupt for one quick second. relative to the payments that we're making on the pension plans,
Yes.
the fact is that this is not a simple equation that it equates one to the other, because there are other components that add into the payment. So you can't make a simple line from one to the other, because a pension plan is much more than just the pension. And quite frankly, this is 70 years of debt that we are paying down. So we're getting there. We're doing much better than we were. I go through all of this, but it incorporates other things that go into that ADAC payment. The number of people, the age of the people, the risk of the people that are associated with that debt are all incorporated into it. So to say that when we pay $1, that we get $1.20 off, not necessarily true, because we just don't know. Is there any other questions?
I have one more question, if I may.
Go ahead.
In the STF fund, what is the level of assumed bonding going forward in the that you all made in the forward projections?
I believe that's in our report. I don't have it off the top of my head. We can get that to you.
I'll double check the report. Sorry, I missed that. That's it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me go a second time.
Representative Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I want to thank everybody that from OFA and OPM for for providing us with this information. I want to underscore what my co-chair said. Any reports such as your breakdowns, Neil, in the graphs that you have potentially ongoing, one time, etc., all of those would be extremely appreciated. And also, if you have the breakdown by subcommittees, that would be even more helpful for us, especially in appropriations. So I'd like to see that. And then Secretary Beckham, I'd like to see the employee report that you said that you guys have done or are completed for currently for what we are filling back with state employees' positions in Connecticut. I think I'm sorry?
I may have misspoke on that. There may be a DAS report. That was
is that a DAS
I can't remember if
report?
it was DAS or OPM, but the administration has been producing a regular report on that.
Okay, so the current one would be appreciated. I think we got some earlier this summer, but I don't think we've got a recent one. So I'd like to see that, and I know everybody else would like to see it. I think the concern that I have is right sizing government, and the concern is how do we define right sizing government? Do we define right sizing government by making sure that people have access to services on a timely fashion? And I think that's critical for looking at the PS lapses that we've got going, because I know I would say for the last 4 months, numerous people have called legislators complaining about inability to get things concluded because of staffing. And we have to be very clear about how we expect our state government to address the concerns and the requests and the needs of the people of Connecticut. So when we start to look at the PS holdbacks and how we fill them, I think we have to also talk about how are we evaluating what is the level that is necessary. You may be right. There may be probably some reductions that we can make, but from what I've got from constituents and my colleagues, there's a long difference between adequate funding and needed funding. So I think we all have to talk about that in many of the different agencies. So I would appreciate a conversation about that also.
Madam Chairman, if I may.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sorry. I didn't mean ma'am. I'm sorry.
I need to reiterate, there is no policy, no effort to downsize the workforce to save money. None. We are not doing that. We are trying as hard as we humanly can to fill every position that our agencies need to deliver those services. We quite agree with you. Those services are expected by the public, and we expect to deliver them. The governor expects that we deliver them. We are making every effort. As I said, I described some efforts we've made this year and continue to make. We are facing an historically difficult labor market. For reasons I don't understand, it is hard to attract people to work at this point in our history. But we are doing everything we can to bring in everybody we need to deliver all those services. To the extent that there's a demand, we absolutely need to meet the demand. I think there's another conversation we may have where we may be spending money in other areas where there isn't as great a demand. And that's some of the conversations around higher ed. So we'll have that conversation separately. But as to delivering health and human services needs to the people of this state, we absolutely agree with you, and we are not doing anything to restrict or attrit or otherwise save money.
Okay, no, I'm glad to hear that. I think you're absolutely right. However, if we have to find a way of filling those gaps of positions that we have, sometimes we should look at our higher ed areas to try and attract and get more students in so that we can get those fulfilled. So I think it's a hand in glove kind of situation. We don't want to restrict access to higher education if that's going to help us in acquiring more employees available for the state of Connecticut. So it's an open conversation, and I can tell it's going to be a vibrant conversation between you and appropriations. So we look forward to those conversations, and I thank you all for everything you've done. Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to have this latitude to ask for some reports and also express my opinion. So thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative Walker. Senator Saud, Senator Anwar.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to piggyback on what Madam Co-Chair had said. I think we are having a problem in recruiting healthcare professionals, more so physicians, more so in the area in our state, specifically the prison systems, because these are difficult jobs and the state pays are not at par with what's out in the community. And we are not able to provide care to our subjects, and we get sued every year, and then we end up paying for those because of lack of enough workforce. So we may have to factor some of the cost around that to make sure that we are.
Guys, Senator Anwar, thank you very much. But I just want to, this is a question timeframe for the Office of Fiscal Analysis and the Office of Policy Management. So we're not going to get into policy statements here on this on today. I understand that people all want to make their political points, but this is questions. So do you have any question relative to this?
I think we should factor
we're getting into a point where this is not questions. This is all of us taking jabs at different people, and I don't want to get into that. That's not what this report is about. This is just a question. Do you have a question for the Office of Policy Management or the Office of Fiscal Analysis? Regarding the report, not regarding anything else, regarding the report that we have.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Fazio, a question, sir, please.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ayers, is with the rise in interest rates, are the higher interest rate costs for debt service baked into the projections?
That is a factor in it. We've had some very successful recent sales that's also impacted that. And I think that's Secretary Beckham went into this more. The better ratings for our bonds has offset that. But there are numerous factors that are impacting our estimates on those. That would be one of them.
So I assume, the market is dictated that we have higher, that our interest rate costs are higher, irrespective of our rating increases. But those higher interest rates are baked into our debt service line item on these projections fully or not.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
It's one of many factors that's cooked into it.
Got it.
Okay. Are there any other questions? relative to the report. Alrighty, guys, we all have copies of both the OPM and the OFA report. If you have any other questions, you can send them into the administrator for the Appropriations Committee, and she will forward them to OPM and OFA to get us through get answers to any of those questions. I want to thank both of you, both offices, for your responses and your in-depth reporting. It's always helpful to us at the beginning of the year to have that information. I know that Senator Minor had to leave for another meeting. Representative France, do you have anything else?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to hear the report. It does, as Senator Minor characterized, it is one of the best that I've seen in my time. I'm hopeful for the additional reporting that we've all requested and as they continue into the legislative session. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Walker, anything else? Senator Fonfara, anything else?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Scanlon. Senator Martin.
None, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Representative Cheeseman.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to wish everyone a happy and healthy season as we go into the new year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you all in January. If not before then. Again, thank you very much. Neil, please let everybody in the office know that we really appreciate all their hard work. And Jeff, same thing for you and for all the people that work over there. And we'd like you to stop stealing workers from the Office of Fiscal Analysis.
I told you our recruitment efforts are vigorous.
All right, guys, everybody have a nice day. Well, Madam Administrator, anything else going on that we need to be prepared for?
No, ma'am. So everyone can enjoy their holiday season, whatever
All
that
right.
may be.
Happy holidays, everybody.